What's up, brand builders? Stephen Hurahan here on the Brand Master podcast. And in this episode, I'm delighted to have my very first guest in the form of the energetic and highly personable Mr. Matt Davies. Now, Matt has been around the block when it comes to branding. He's been a freelance designer, an agency owner, a creative director. He's been an in-house manager, and now he's a brand strategist and consultant. So he has a wealth of experience. And in today's chat, we're going to be talking about becoming a branding consultant, knowing what your value is, and running brand strategy workshops. Welcome to the Brand Master podcast, show specialized in helping branding professionals and entrepreneurs to build brands using strategy, psychology, and creative thinking. Okay, so welcome to the Brand Master podcast, and I'm delighted to say I have my very first guest, the one and only Mr. Matt Davies. Now, for those of you who do not know Mr. Matt Davies, he is a brand strategist, brand consultant. He flies all over the world and talks to brands and builds brands using strategy and culture. And yeah, so that is Mr. Matt Davies, mate. Welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be your first guest. I hope we set the bar high. That's my ambition for today.
That is my ambition too, and I was for those who don't know, I was on Just Branding podcast. Matt is one of the hosts of Just Branding podcast, and Matt was absolutely surgical with his questions. So I'm going to try and do the same today. He squeezed
get your own back.
He squeezed the value out of me like a juicer. So I'm going to try and do the same. So yeah, let's dive into it, mate. Now, I'm kind of fascinated with your journey because it kind of aligns to a lot of designers up until a point, and then it becomes a little bit more unique. So you became a designer like the rest of us, but then you built an agency. You quickly built that up, and then you went on to sell that agency. Talk us through how you went from a designer to selling an agency with over 12 people. Were there over 12 people in the agency?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
I'll try and keep it as brief as possible because I'm getting old now. So every time someone asks me this, like, it gets longer, right? And you feel like you're Alice in Wonderland a little bit still. So I grew up in London in the UK, worked at some agencies in London, moved to Nottingham to get married, which is like in the Midlands of Nottingham, where Robin Hood was, right? Heartbeat of England. And worked again for some agencies in Nottingham. And then decided, I think I was about, I'm about 35 now, right? Let you into a secret, but I think I was about 23 or something. Perhaps I was quite a cocky 23-year-old, I don't know. But I thought, right, there were certain things that happened where I thought, oh, that was right. I'd started my own blog, right? And this was back in the day when blogs were not a thing really yet. And my mates used to call me Mattitude, right? Just because I've got this weird attitude to life. So
Did you self-brand yourself?
Well, no, I didn't want to go that far. My mates did it. But I quite like the word attitude. So I started this blog called Attitude Design, right? And started putting on my portfolio and, blogging and stuff. And whilst I was working at an agency, right? And I started to get all these inquiries through from people who were looking at my stuff. And in fact, bizarrely, the blog became #1 in the world at that point for the search phrase graphic design, right? So there's little Matt Davies, 23, didn't have a beard then, right? Couldn't grow a beard. Some might say still can't, but I do my best. But yeah, so I started to get all these inquiries in, and what I would do is I'd go to the account manager who I work closely with at the agency, and I'd say, look, this person's inquired. Would we be interested? The agency say, well, get back to them, say, yeah. So then I go back to this client and say, oh, I can't do it direct, but here's, this account manager, speak to him. The account manager would get the quotes, send them through. And I think the agency, they were relatively big for this area. And we were doing work with like Fred Perry globally and some really cool brands. I think they were more, they were kind of like, they probably were just like, this is Matt, little Matt, he's a junior designer or whatever. But as time went on, I started to look at what revenue this was building up. And I just thought, do you know what? I said to my wife one day, I think I could do this, right? Like I could do a quote, like it's not that hard. And I was seeing all the money, the money side of it, but then I was basically managing the projects and then doing the projects because these people would come through the internet for me. So cut a long story short, we decided to jump, saved up like 6 months of my mortgage money and was like really excited. And we jumped, and then I never had to eat into that 6 months, made a profit from day one, was so thankful for that. And then, grew a little company over about 9 years here in Nottingham. And we punched way above our weight. We were doing stuff with Boots, the chemist, which is quite a big kind of pharmaceutical chemist over here. We did stuff for Nikon. We did stuff for Specsavers. So yeah, it was pretty great, pretty fun. But the business side was a nightmare, because, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be in this scenario. It's kind of like feast or famine. It's very hard to get retainer or stability, very hard in the creative industries. I managed to get a few, and that allowed us to expand, but I'd got no business training, nothing, right? I was on the edge of my seat most of the time, and I had a great time. But after 9 years, I was like burnt out. I was like, I can't chase another pitch again. I can't be doing this. And there were certain things in the industry that really frustrated me, and I can get into that at some stage. Anyway, the point is that whilst I was doing that, one of the key things that we struggled with as a creative, and we were basically focused on design. One of the main things that we struggled with was with backwards and forwarding with clients. I called it The client would send a brief. We'd do what we thought was right, send it to the client. Client would say, no, try again. So we'd have to start again and then do it again. And then basically clients operated under this, I realized, under this psychology of if we don't like it, we'll let you know. But if we do like it, that's great. But we can't tell you what we really want until we see it. So it's like, oh, that's great. So anyway, cut a long story short, we started doing workshops, and I fell in love with workshops, found I had a kind of a secret skill that I never knew I had. Maybe I'm a bit of a performer. You've probably seen a bit of that. Maybe, I don't know what it is, but I love the energy of being in the moment. And some designers freak out about that. I totally get that. Some designers like to sit in their rooms and do their work, but I just loved getting out, seeing clients, making them laugh, making them cry sometimes, in a good way, and that kind of stuff. And I enjoyed that emotional thing. So as creative director of my agency, that was kind of my role, to get out there, make the sales often, then also work on the consultancy basis with them, and then bring the great briefs back to my team. Anyway, also during that time, to add value to these workshops, what I realized was I had to read, right? So I read shed loads of books, still do. And I love reading books. I find it, fascinating, the ideas that we can glean from others. Anyway, so I learned a lot about brand then, and I built these brand workshops out, and a lot of the stuff that you do at Brandmaster Academy, not everything, mind. I'm sure you've got one or two things way over and above what my poor brain can handle. But all of that stuff around how you basically structure a workshop, what you put in the workshop, what problems you solve for leadership teams, I kind of learned in the fire, right? You just got to throw yourself out there. Anyway, then I was burnt out. I sold the agency 2016, went to work for a much bigger agency who basically bought my little agency off of me and my wife. My wife left the business because it was both of us together. I then worked for this big agency, was their creative director. They were a digital marketing agency, and I headed up their creative wing. And then after about a year and a bit of that, I was on their board. It was great. I then was headhunted by Capital One in the UK, who are like a big finance company. And again, I was still quite tired in the agency world. It's just like constantly chasing projects, and after a while, I just started to get quite weary with it. And managing people, I realized actually I'm okay at managing people. I can manage a team, but is that really where I want to be? It takes you a long time to figure these things out. Anyway, headhunted by Capital One, they wanted me to set up an agency in-house for them. which was an amazing opportunity, great load of resources. The corporate coffee was good. But the restrictions within the corporate function, were tough. But I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. I did that for about a year as well. The opportunities were great. They flew me over to Toronto to a design team over there. I worked with them for a bit and learned loads about organizational structure and how to manage brands for corporates and from an in-house perspective. And that was a real eye opener. And then basically, I was kind of put in a position where they had a complete rethink about their whole design team, and there was about 50 or 60 people in their design team. And so basically, there was a number of opportunities to take my leave, if you like. So I basically left and took that opportunity. And found, the corporate life was getting to me a little bit, to be frank. And I was then kind of like on my own, and I was like, well, what on earth? This was about 2 years ago. What on earth do I do now? Right? I've done agency, built agency, sold agency. I've run agency. I've gone in house. There wasn't a lot else I could do. So I had a few people contact me and say, look, Matt, would you come join us? Some other agencies. And Capital One paid very nicely, very handsomely, being honest. And so when I'd sort of talk about wage expectations, people would like fall off their chairs. So that was a problem because I was basically unemployable. So then what happened was they said, well, why don't you come on and just freelance for us on this one like project rather than come and join our whole team? Why don't we just use you for this? So I started thinking about that. I went back to my wife and I said, love, I think I'm going to do this. And she's like, no. Remember the stress of running a company and managing people and sales? And I was like, well, look, this is the deal. I'm not going to employ anyone. And I'm going to read a shed load of books on how to actually do this business stuff properly. So she said, fine. As long as you don't employ someone.
So in terms of your relationship with brand strategy, and, you mentioned falling in love, and it's kind of, that definitely resonates with me as well, because for me, it was just like, this thing that, I got a taste of, and I wanted more and more and more. And my relationship with strategy has been exactly what you've mentioned there, been about books. It's been about research. Is obviously that's how you cut your teeth with strategy. And then it was really about pioneering something from you. You weren't handed a framework. You weren't handed the systems and the processes. You had to figure all of that out for yourself. So, what was that like? Was that basically trial and error? How did you form those processes over time?
Well, firstly, you're absolutely right. And I think, for all the listeners out there, that's why there's huge value in something like Brandmaster Academy that you set up, because that stuff didn't exist. Like, it was in books, and also not very accessibly in books. Like, I remember reading some really
you had to decode them.
Books. Yeah. And also it's like, there might be a book like, here's a great book. Let me show you this book, right? Have you seen this book, The Hero and the Outlaw? I don't know if you've seen this book.
Yes.
But this book talks about one of my favorite tools, which is archetypes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love this book. I'm literally in love with this book. Like, you can see I've got all this stuff. But this book, right? And this is it's kind of heavy for a designer to read. Like, a designer wouldn't pick this book up and go, oh, do you know what? I'm going to read that book because there's no pictures in it, right? Mm. And some of the concepts in it are quite heavy. And that book is a great book, but it doesn't then teach you how to get information from it and apply it, for example, in a workshop or in a framework, right? You've got to kind of figure some of that stuff out from the book yourself. So how did that happen? Well, I think what it was, Stephen, to be honest, I would look at everything from the perspective of solving a problem, and I still do. And I think as designers, our brains are actually wired in such a way that we have a huge advantage over a lot of the business world if we just apply our brains to business rather than creating a leaflet or a website or a banner stand or something, right? If you took the same principles as you do to create something like that, like a piece of artwork, if you take that and you apply it to a business problem, right, it's basically the same thing. So what do? We find the problem, first of all. Sometimes that's hard. because sometimes you've got to do some exploration to find the problem. And then you've got to figure out, well, how do I bring everybody on the journey to the future of solving that problem? So we imagine a better future. So we're here in the present. We imagine the better future, which we're great at doing as being creatives. We really picture that in our minds. And then what we do as designers, we're in a great place to design the way forward. And if you can explain to a CEO, right, okay, you're here with me. This is the problem, which we've agreed. That's the future where that problem no longer exists. And this is how I can begin to take you on a journey. And these are the steps and the stages. What you then find is that people, you might not know all the intricate details, but at least if you can give phases or give exercises in a workshop, for example, and say, look, once we've done this exercise, we're going to know this. Mm-hmm. People love it. And particularly CEOs who perhaps have major problems, or business leaders, because you build trust, and particularly if you can say, well, I did this last week, and here's an example of how we solved that problem with this company.
Yeah.
That then, oh my days, they love it. So that's kind of what I started to do. I'd be in a workshop, I don't know, and I'd find one of the biggest problems that I still believe that that I kind of get wheeled in to solve is this question of leadership alignment, right? Mm. If you've got a leadership team of a big or a small company, like I did some work a month or so back with Nestle, who are huge, right? And but I also work with startups, right? So the gamut of kind of businesses, you find that there's always a group of people at the top, always, right? And the synergy between those people will determine the success or failure of whatever it is they're trying to do. So what sometimes they struggle with is the questions of brand, which are, the beautiful questions that you advocate, and that we talk about all the time as strategists. Some of the simplest ones, what's our purpose? Why do we exist beyond making money? Who do we exist to serve? Why does it matter? Why are we different? These are the questions that if leaders don't all align around, the business can become very almost like split personality, because one leader is taking the concepts off into one direction and the other has a different view and taking it in a different direction. And it's amazing how many businesses don't take the time to sit down and solve and answer these questions together. They might have it in their own heads, which is great for them. But if they don't do it and align the parallel think it through, then they have these splits and splinters start to appear. And then if they don't get stuck together, in 10 years' time, man, the whole business has got 15 different brands and, they're operating 18 different categories and no one understands how anything fits together and they can't recruit anyone. The usual problem.
So I would imagine then, based on what you've said there, that, if you're dealing with a startup, the types of questions that you would be asking would be, around about positioning, how they are positioned in the marketplace and what makes them different, and why they're the only X in whatever category. Whereas if you're dealing with kind of a Nestle or a higher level brand, then it's more about synergy and alignment, because the line is already drawn in the sand, and really you're not trying to recreate anything there. You're trying to get everybody pulling in the same direction. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously every situation is different. I think with bigger brands that are already established, you're right. Like, they're massive ships. You can't just turn them real quick, right? You have to, if they want turning, and sometimes they need turning, sometimes they want to differentiate themselves. It takes a lot more convincing, if you like. You got to do a lot more research. You got to tap into their systems, and you got to help them with that. But with smaller brands, it can also be equally as challenging, because a lot of smaller brands, they want to be like somebody else. Mm-hmm. So they look up to everybody around them. And, as you say, then they can fall into the trap of sameness very quickly, because they want to be like, whoever it is in the market that they perceive as being the biggest cheese. The best sort of approach is, with differentiation is kind of it's kind of difficult. It depends. Well, I guess what I'm going to say is I'm going to gabble a little bit here. I'm going to say it depends on the leader that I'm working with. That's the truth. It depends what they want to do, what they want to achieve. But going back to the point that I was making earlier, it depends. So it depends on what they want to achieve, and it depends what blockers are in the way. depends on how I would then I'd go and read a book. Like I do it now. Where was I? I was reading this book. So I'm working with a client at the moment, and they're talking about, they'd started on a process of what they called servitization, right? Which is where they're a manufacturing client. And what you do is you add services to your product, like training or, I don't know, maintenance, for example, might be a service. And you build value around your manufactured product. So they'd started on this process, and they're talking about servitization. And I'm thinking, I understand the principles of this, right? Intellectually, but not the depth, right? So I'm like, what book are you taking this from? And they tell me this book. So off I go, and I buy the book, and I take the time. And I think as a consultant, that's the important thing. You're always learning things. And I'm taking this book and I'm looking at it critically. And I basically have gone back to them and said, I don't actually think this is quite right for us for these reasons, And so suddenly, like, and half of them haven't read the book, but they're sort of quoting it. So a lot of people, when they're running a business, they think they need to do things. The truth is, your job as a strategist is to help make sense of it and make sure it is the right thing for them. And you can only sometimes do that by learning stuff yourself and being open to that. So that's my approach.
Well, always by learning stuff yourself. And I think that, you've definitely touched on, a philosophy of mine, which is, never think that you've arrived. You're always learning. And, whenever you have an opportunity to learn from somebody else, whether they've taken the time to put it into a book or to put it onto a podcast, if you're able to take something away and apply that to your own processes, then you're better for it. But in terms of the workshops, which you mentioned earlier, now, I've seen videos of you presenting to groups, and you've got a spark. You've got, something that a lot of designers don't have. A lot of designers tend to be introverted. They don't necessarily have those skills. That's not to say that they can't develop them. But in terms of your workshops, you're very much in-person workshops, take control of the room. Can you tell me a little bit about your process? How long does it take you in terms of, I know that everyone is the same, but just give me an overview of your framework in terms of your structure. I know that you break it down in terms of problems, and that's how you approach it. Can you tell me a little bit about your process?
So, Stephen, you're going to hate this part of the podcast because I have a no process, which you're going to love. So bear with me on this one. Okay. I just want to intro this a little bit from my perspective. So I think when I was in agency, running my agency, we spent a long time packaging frameworks and processes, which you have to do to some extent, particularly when you're in an agency, particularly when you want to estimate. Well, my view is a lot of people do that because they want to package something like a product so clients understand what they're going to get. And they like to do it so that they can work out, roughly speaking, how many hours it might take, and so that they can scale it and replicate it, which is amiable and noble and respectable. And that's everything there is great. However, the truth is, this is the hard truth now, guys. So, this is where I get thrown off of Stephen's own podcast. The truth is reality is different, right? When you're in the jungle, stuff happens, right? That you have no control over. A lion jumps out, a gorilla throws something at you. Who knows? But the point is that if you are in a very rigid system or process that you have sold in and you rely on X hours to do X service, because that's how you operate, and the lion jumps out and you've got to take a detour, that becomes a problem for you, right? The client doesn't care because they think that they're buying the end result. Mm-hmm. But if you've sold them a process, a rigid process to get to the end result, and you're hanging on to this process, they don't care about the process. They want the end result. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I learned, quite heavily, from experience. So I don't know if this is too abstract, talking about lions and stuff, but I guess what I'm saying is let's say we're starting a project. We're all visual. We can all visualize that scary lion. But let's say we're going through a project, I don't know, and we're in a leadership workshop, first one, you've never met these people before, and they're all piling in, or you're on Zoom or whatever. And there happens to be somebody who really doesn't get it, right? Who's constantly not sure, arms folded, silent. You have to tease out information from them, and they're very sort of, negative about it, right? Now, and maybe let's say you, in your rigid process, you've got 3 of these workshops to do with them, right? Now, you've got a problem, because if that person's not on board and you can't convince them within the workshop, and you then do the second workshop and they come in and they do the same thing, they can derail the whole process, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you have an element of flexibility in your processes, you can decide, possibly, depending on how you've arranged things, to phone that person or to have a quick call with them after the workshop and confront them with, listen, we were doing this workshop, and I got the sense that you weren't kind of completely on board. Like, what was happening? So, but you to get to that confidence level, you have to completely, frame things differently. And then you might find when you speak to them, oh, that's because in our department, we already did this last week, and then you're like, well, what did you do? And then you have to go into their department. You have to find out what was done. You almost have to pause the main project to go off on a tangent to figure out what was going on over there, to make sure you understand it, so that when you get everybody back in the room, everything's, it's smoothed over and you can understand where that person's coming from. Now, that's just a random, example. But the point I'm trying to make here is rigid processes, sometimes have their, sometimes they work fine, but mm-hmm. sometimes they have these problems. So when I sort of start an engagement with a client, I'm always looking to build in the maximum amount of flexibility, because everybody's situation is different and every business is different. So when you talk about a framework, I go by pretty much a lot of standard stuff, purpose, vision, mission, or you could reframe that why, how, who, and what, that kind of stuff, which is a sensible one I do, just in terms of just simplifying thinking down. Mm-hmm. But the key for me is to deploy different frameworks in different circumstances. So I don't have I guess
you see me, when I think about strategy, it's very important for me to feel a sense of structure, and that's why
there's always structure.
To use an analogy, I would look at point A and point B, and I would have the beaten track to get from A to B. And what you're saying is that you have the tools in your arsenal to take out your machete and go out to the left a little bit if you need to, but you still have this overarching framework to get from point A to point B. And you would use typically exercises within your workshops to focus on specific problems. So you would have, problem A, B, C, D, E, F, G that you would like to typically address within a workshop, so you can develop a strategy, and you would use exercises to extract what those problems are. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. All my stuff is always done with leadership teams, and we do exercises. Often there's research beforehand as well, like a lot of research, because when you go into a leadership meeting, you need to know your P's and Q's. You've
touched on an important point, and it's a question that's probably 2 or 3 down, and we may not get there. So I want to pull this one up here and jump in with that. So you're talking about research, and one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, the idea of research and analysis based on human understanding versus deep analysis. And there's also the question in there of the discovery session versus the workshop session. So at what point do you kind of look at what you need to discover from them, what you need to go away and research, and then how much information do you want to be armed with going into your workshop? Do you see what I'm asking there? The structure of the discovery versus the research versus the workshop. How does that work for you?
So a lot of my engagements, mainly when you're at the start of a project, you need to do what I call is brand definition, right? We need to define, the key constructs of the brand. That's the main strategic element. And there's 2 parts to that. You're absolutely right. There is what we think and believe and our ambition. but there's also what does the market look like? What's the realities? What do the customers think at the moment? And what would the customers think if we pivoted or changed at all? So again, each client, very different information. Clients hold different data sets. Some have no data sets whatsoever. Being a lone sort of gunslinger, right? I think it adds huge, benefits. And one of the things I would do early on before I even take a project is to ask these sorts of questions, like, what information do we have already, about our customers? What information do we have, on what our leadership ambitions are? Do we have a commercial plan, a commercial strategy, a business strategy that we need to adhere to a board or a load of stakeholders? And what does that look like? So you've got to get all of that basics in place. And if they don't have, and if they have that stuff, often there's somebody within the business in marketing whose job it is to have kind of synthesized some of that information. So you don't have to do all the analysis yourself, I guess is what I'm saying. You can get, as a lone gunslinger, I will be saying, well, who put this together? Okay, Larry. Right, I want to meet with Larry. Is that okay? Sorry, Larry's my go-to. Right?
It's always Larry.
It's always Larry. So poor Larry then finds himself on a 2-hour Zoom call with Matt Davies, just grilling him on his numbers and kind of trying to get something basically that I can simplify everything, all that sort of data stuff. You've got to simplify into insights so that you and the leadership team have something of value when you're in a workshop situation that you can then pull on and use to help frame things or challenge things. So it's about simplification. Data by itself is useless. Your data is only as good as your insights. Another sort of angle in that discovery phase, and again, it depends on what the customers are like, is, and I do get my hands dirty with this, is to get out and talk to customers. They might have customer groups that you can access, that you can speak to. So I will do interviews myself or run workshops, focus groups myself. And again, you've got to know what you're looking for. You've got to try and kind of get a feel for what do they think about the brand now? If this brand didn't exist, what would your other go-to options be? If you didn't know about us, what would you be Googling to solve this problem? These are all really important information. And then maybe that would lead to me jumping on Google and pulling out a load of information. You're kind of in that discovery. I call it the 3D. I've got a process. It's called the 3D process: discovery, definition, delivery, right? So the discovery one is your listening mode. You're opening up possibilities. You're gathering information. And the other great source I often find before we get into workshops, if you can do this, I've found this a good tip for everybody, is try and get even just 15 minutes with every leader that's going to come into your workshop, just on the phone, just to introduce yourself. And then I always ask them, what does success look like for you in this process? Super important, because different people have different views of that. And they might be like, well, I'm in HR. So one thing I'd love is to know, to have some information to help with our onboarding process. You're like, right, there's something going on over there. That's interesting. So you kind of get a map of leadership ambition and where the market is. You do your market research, go off and find all the competitors, map them out visually, whatever you need to do. You get a picture. So when you enter that room or that Zoom call, and you're asking leaders, why do we exist? Nobody in the company knows. You guys have struggled with it, and I understand there's some barriers. You also have in the backlog of your mind what the market's doing, and you can pull on things to help them with that. So what I would do is I would map all that out, do that discovery, but as you say, there's a clear process, and usually what happens is I agree that with the sponsor of the project on a quarterly basis. So I would say to them, look, it seems to me the biggest thing that we need to do is get a purpose and a vision statement that everybody's comfortable with, for example, if that's what they need. Give me, this quarter to nail that. And that requires me to do a shed load of research and then do a few workshops, maybe one, might be 4, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's how I work. And you pay me retainer and I just choose and apply myself. But at the end of this quarter, we'll have that nailed. And that's kind of how I operate. It's very loose. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it requires me working 12-hour days, very rarely. Sometimes I just need to do 3 hours on an afternoon a week. And that's it. I can admit to that contract.
And that's
but
the benefit, I suppose, that you have as a lone gunslinger, as you said. You know, you march to the beat of your own drum. You're able to adapt to each and every client, and you know, you're not restricted by a rigid process, as you said. Well, in terms of how you then conclude, so you take the time to go through your discovery, you take the time to do your research to get that background image of what the company looks like, what the market looks like in the background. You go into that room, you hold these exercises, and you extract all this information to really fill in the blanks and to illuminate, you know, your already structured idea of what should be. And as you probably know, that can take many different directions. How then, and I know a lot of designers struggle with this, because, you know, the idea at that point would be that a designer would go away, work on the visuals, and work on the website, and that's not what you do. You don't get your hands dirty in any of that execution stuff. It's really only about the consultancy and the delivery of that strategy. How does that sit with clients, and do you ever see a disconnect there of where the client says to you, well, hey, you've done all this work, you're not actually going to go ahead and do the rest of it now? Tell me about that tension there that I'm talking about.
Okay, so right. Here's the thing that I realized, Stephen, over the years, and is that when you help a business solve these problems or align around these big questions, it's not just marketing or an execution or a tactical creative kind of output that's needed, right? That's helpful for them. So if they know some of these core things, like let's take the values of a brand, right? Great. Marketing need to know that, because they need to kind of present the and sales, marketing and sales, they need to present the brand in this way. You might have ops people, customer experience people, they need to know these principles so that they can pepper it throughout the customer experience. HR need to know this, because they need to recruit people who share these values, and they need to build processes around these values in order to make sure that they stick and that the company is actually living them. So what I found was, it was some years ago now, but I found myself getting involved, even when I was running my agency, in some really weird situations. And I'd sometimes pinch myself, like, what on earth am I doing presenting the brand strategy to a bunch of HR people, right? Or getting involved in designing what's called employee experience, right? So how do we onboard people? What are we, how do we recruit them? What's our recruitment look like? Job descriptions, what are we putting in there? What are we doing on day 1, day 30, day 90? How do we map that out? And I'm finding myself like, this is really weird. Like, I'm a creative graphic designer, and I'm still applying design skills, but now I'm in HR, and I'm working with all these strange HR people, and they're all very polite and very lovely, but this is not the design world that I'm used to, with funky people and, in crazy flower shirts and skinny jeans. Like, where am I? What am I doing here? So what I realized, anyway, sorry, I gabble, but what I realized in all that is that once you can help business strategically, and particularly leadership teams, there are more than one application of a brand strategy than just the creative output of how that brand looks. It's not a veneer. We often say this, and if anyone hears me speak or anything, you'll know that I often say, like, your brand is not your logo, right? And I know you believe this. My definition is it's the meaning people attach to you and your offer. And branding is the game we're in. And I had this definition very early on. Branding is the attempt to manage that meaning. And one way that we manage the meaning is we define what we want people to attach to us, and then we apply it to our marketing and look and feel. But that's just one. There's loads of other components to this. And I'm still trying to figure, to be honest, all of that out. And maybe a book will come out at some stage. But I'm thinking there's definitely a massive area in HR that I work on. There's an area in marketing. There's an area in customer experience. There are even areas in leadership and training programs and stuff like that. So there's lots of things that you realize you can add value to a business to, not just the design side. So that's point number one. And so I'm starting to dabble and explore that. So I guess I'm becoming more of a business consultant than anything. And brand is like the Trojan horse that you get into with. And then it's like, there's a door, a half ajar over there. I'll go and push that door open and do some work over there. And that's how it kind of works. I've built culture programs and all sorts. It's bizarre.
I think that is the added advantage that we have as branding specialists, because the word brand and branding, it's a double-edged sword. On one side, you have this misunderstanding of what it is in terms of design and logo. But on the other side, brand encompasses everything. Absolutely everything. And as you said, if you use that approach as a Trojan horse, then it filters down into everything as well. So brand strategy includes everything. And this kind of leads into one of my final questions. I've got two more questions for you. I know you're early in your day. You probably got a million things to jump into, but I know there are a lot of designers or people transitioning into brand strategy who are held back by their belief that they need to understand, how to execute Facebook ads or how to do SEO, so that they can have this, really tactical approach to applying the brand strategy. And, you are a successful brand strategist and consultant. What would you say to those people in terms of that, because I know that you're not a Facebook ads expert. I know that you're not a Google ads
Definitely
expert, and you don't feel that you need to be. What would you say to a designer who has that thought process, and what's the disconnect there?
So, why do we get paid? Right, is a question I constantly ask myself. Why do I get paid? Money is the currency that we use to reward value, right? So if I value something that you're going to give me, I'll give you more money. If I don't value it, I'm not going to give you any money. So you get paid for adding value. The question is interesting, because what we're saying is do we need to know everything to add value? Answer, no. What do we need to know then? We need to know how to solve the problem. That's it. So I would say to designers, look, start small. Keep doing what you're doing, right? Keep creating your websites, your brochures, your leaflets, your campaigns, whatever it is for your client. But start listening to bigger problems, because I think we have, as an industry, have a major issue in that, and this is what I saw coming when I was running my agency. Like we were making loads of money on, do you remember like the early days of like WordPress, right? I don't know if anyone here on the podcast understands what I'm talking about. I'm probably too old.
I do, mate.
But like
I do.
WordPress, when it first started, it was quite hard to set up a WordPress site, right? So my agency, we were setting up lots of little websites on WordPress, and we were earning an absolute fortune. Just like maybe have 10 little WordPress websites coming through the studio at any one time. So it was great day. The time was great. But then along the track, I'm looking and I'm seeing Squarespace, Wix, and all these kind of platforms which allow clients to basically do it themselves. So now, the thought of paying somebody a lot of money to set up a WordPress site, when WordPress itself, you can click a button and basically it sets it up for you, is now not a thing. So we've got some technical problems. Technology is becoming easier for clients to do their own thing, and design wise, everybody thinks they're a designer, and so design's becoming commoditized. So I think we need to ask, as designers, bigger questions. What problem are we actually solving? And if we can figure that out, then we can actually begin to orientate ourselves in that direction. So what I would say is start small, listen to what your customers are saying, and if you don't know everything, like you don't need to know everything, right? But you just need to help. You need to help people solve problems. So research, do your reading, jump onto Brandmaster Academy, right? There's a little plug for you.
And listen, I totally agree with what you say. And to kind of illustrate your point, if you think about a business owner, a business owner will have a complete journey, and that starts with this spark of idea to create a business, and it will never stop as long as they continue to manage their business. Now, if you're a designer, you play a small part in that role, and you play a small part in that journey to help them get from one step to the next. the more parts that you can add to their journey, the more value you give, as you've rightly pointed out. And even if you decide to provide brand strategy, it does not mean that you need to provide the entire journey. You're just providing a bigger segment of their overall journey. So I think that's it's pretty much what you said. And yeah, and we could visualize that. I could put a slide on that and animate it on the YouTube channel. But mate, I've got one more question for you to part on this one, because I think, you know, any designer listening to this, any aspiring strategist, listening to this, is there's such great value in this, listening to someone from your level of experience. And you know, if you had your younger self come to you looking for advice, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, and they wanted to transition or at least start the journey into strategy, or to get to that level of consultant where they're no longer dealing with the execution side of things, they're helping businesses on a higher level, what would be one kind of tip that you would give them to that they can kind of take action on?
So I've probably already said it, but I think I would say to myself, you need to read more, right? You need the vocabulary of the boardroom. You need to understand business better. I think in my younger days, I very much saw myself as a designer, and I liked fonts and colors and, treatments of images and stuff like that. And all that stuff is super valuable. But in the boardroom, if you go, I think it should be green, like no one cares. No one cares. You have to justify it with some rationale. And really, the color scheme in terms of a CEO's mind is often way, way down the decisions they're trying to make, which is what market segment are we going to go into? What's the value of this category, and how are we going to outmaneuver the competition and all this stuff? Like, these are the big questions that the boardroom want answers to, and they need people like us to help articulate that and help them rally around some of their thinking. So what I'd say is read more, and basically try and understand business at a higher level. And once you do that, the value you can then bring to your projects, the understanding, it can become higher, because you can help businesses solve bigger problems. And that's what strategy ultimately does. And as designers, I passionately believe that we are in a position better than perhaps anyone else, with our training, with the way our brains think, to really create those kind of meaningful futures for people, and help imagine them and help design then the processes to bring everybody with us along the way. But it does take time. You have to throw yourself into the fire a few times. You get stung a couple of times. I've been stung many times in the jungle along the way, and I'm sure you have as well, Stephen.
Absolutely.
But never give up. Pick yourself up, and just learn from it. I think there's an old Chinese proverb. I'm going to probably say this. I assume it's Chinese. I don't know why I assume that. I think I've read it somewhere. And it's kind of like, you only make a mistake when you make a mistake twice, right? So first time you make a mistake, it's not a mistake if you learn from it, is the lesson. So don't be afraid. Read. Don't be afraid. Go for it. That's what I say. Go for it, guys. You've got this. On
that note, Sensei, thank you very much, Matt. It was an absolute pleasure. Tons of value. And I've no doubt that the listeners are going to get heaps from this.
It's been an absolute honor. Thank you very much. And keep doing what you're doing with BrandBuildr Academy. We need more people like you, Stephen, to help us designers, add the value that we know we can add. So thank you for all you do.
We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to learn more brand strategy techniques to level up your skills, make sure you check out BrandMasterAcademy.com. There's plenty of free resources and premium content for you to download and get you going. If you'd like to join our Facebook group full of like-minded brand strategists, all learning from each other, then find us by searching for the Brand Strategy Community, where you can find exclusive content for members as well. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to give us an honest review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listened, and make sure you tune in for the next episode of the BrandMaster Podcast.